Starting out as a Sufi brotherhood that traces its lineage and name to the great Sufi Sheikh Shafiuddin Ardebili, the Safavids, for the first time since the fall of the Sassanid Empire, soon developed into a well-organized political force that conquered Persia and united it into political unity. The fact that Persia was predominantly Shiite provided the backdrop for the development of the doctrines of the sciences, Ishrāqi gnosis, and philosophy. The efforts of the intellectual chain of Hukama or sages from Ibn Sina to Ibn Arabi suddenly found the conducive environment for the flourishing of this form of wisdom. However, in seeking legitimacy for their rule, the Safavid monarchs needed dogmaticians, jurists, clerics, and preachers to spread the ideological foundation of the state. This, of course, disturbed the intellectual atmosphere in which the philosophical and Gnostic disciplines were developing. Nevertheless, when Shah Abbas I came to power, Isfahan became a very comfortable environment for a number of prominent philosophers. Those who were involved in such disciplines are later referred to as the School of Isfahan. The term School of Isfahan was first used by scholars such as Seyyed Nasr and Henry Corbin, and later followed by other scholars as a term referring to the syncretic discourse centered in Isfahan during the Safavid period. The three prominent figures that Corbin studies in his book of this school are Mir Damad, Mullah Sadra Shirazi, and Qadi Zaid Qummi. To these names, Nasr adds those of Sheikh Bahauddin Ameli, Mir Findi Rizki, Mullah Abdul Razik Al-Lahiji, and Mullah Muhsin Faid Kashani. Mullah Rajab Ali Dabasyi and Mullah Shashma Ghilani are also studied in the same group of philosophers. The star of the School of Isfahan was indeed Mullah Sadra, but in fact, the philosophical foundation had been built by Mir Damad's generation. In the history of Islamic philosophy in the Safavid period, Mir Damad was greatly respected and admired by many people and intellectuals. Mir Burhanuddin Muhammad Baqir Damad, who is also referred to as the third master after Aristotle and al-Farabi, well known as the first and second masters respectively, was born in a prominent religious family. Apart from holding the title of the third master with pride and confidence, his honorific title is Sayyidul Afadil, master of the most learned. Mir Damad's father was Mir Shamsuddin, who was the son-in-law of Ali bin Abdul Ali, known as Muhakkik Thani, a prominent Shi'i scholar of the Safavid period. So, Damad is an honorific title meaning son-in-law, which belonged to Mir Damad's father and was then given to Mir Damad. Mir Damad was born in Astarabad and grew up in Mashhad, in the Shia religious capital of Persia. Mir Damad studied Ibn Sina's writings diligently. He also spent part of his life in Qazwin and Kashan before coming to Isfahan during the reign of Shah Abbas. In Isfahan, Mir Damad continued his intellectual exploration. Not only did he study the intellectual and philosophical sciences or ulumul aqliyah, but he also mastered the transmitted sciences, ulumul naqliyah. Amongst the prominent scholars with whom Mir Damad studied were Hossein bin Abdul Samad al-Amili, the father of Sheikh Bahai, Mir Damad's contemporary colleague in Isfahan. His other teacher was Sheikh Abdul Karaki, the son of Muhakkik Thani. It is Mir Damad's own maternal uncle. Mir Damad is known as a Sufi philosopher and jurist. His writing, as acknowledged by his contemporaries, became a reflection of encyclopedic interest in various disciplines. He wrote on many subjects on philosophy, theology, Quran commentary, Sufism, logic, and Shi'i fiqh. No less important to remember, Mir Damad was also a poet. I made my heart the treasure of divine secrets. In the word of intellect I reigned. In Al-Qabasat I become the sea of certitude. The script of doubt and uncertainty I destroyed. Mir Damad's philosophical views are classified as Gnostic, in the sense that his intellectual activities and philosophical works are conducive to mystical experience and spiritual vision. And mystical experience and spiritual vision stimulates rational thought and inject philosophical ideas. Mir Damad's intellectual work in combining several schools in the history of Islamic thought preceded what was done by Mullah Sadra. Although what Mir Damad tried to combine was not as comprehensive as what Sadra later did. Mir Damad brings together the Peripatetic traditions, Aristotelian and Avicennan, and the illuminative traditions, Neoplatonic Surawardian, in the history of Islamic philosophy. The result is a peculiarly successful philosophical discourse in which, as Isutsu has stated, beneath the surface of his dry thinking and through the veils of the abstract concepts, which he handles with remarkable dexterity, we notice the presence of swarming visions originating from an entirely different source, the living experience of a mystic. The main characteristics that came to be known as the School of Isfahan are a combination of meta-rational and rational orientations anchored in the doctrinal principles of the Shiism. Moreover, the School of Isfahan actually grew out of political involvement in philosophy, which was made possible by Shah Abbas, who had intense interest in the religious sciences. As the greatest Safavid one, Shah Abbas cared deeply about his relations with scholars and intellectuals, especially his relations with Mir Damad and Sheikh Bahai. Some eminent theologians, Sufis, philosophers, and jurists were contemporaries of Mir Damad. He had intellectual dialogues and correspondence with them, especially with the Sheikh Bahai. Both Sheikh Bahai and Mir Damad enjoyed prestigious positions at the court of Shah Abbas. The clerics and scholars visited the court regularly, where they held discussions and debates about religious discourses. Such intellectual and political relations enabled Mir Damad to bring to life the great libraries in which old manuscripts were collected, copied, and published. Quote, evidence for this profuse activity are the impressive numbers of Arabic and Persian manuscripts now housed in major collections all over the world, all produced in Isfahan during this period. Mir Damad, Sheikh Bahai, and Mir Findirisky were key figures in the pre-Mullah Sadra period, all of whom shared a common interest in the Peripatetic, illuminationism or Ishrāqiyya, Gnostic, and juridical views of Shiism. The chain of inheritance of Islamic wisdom and philosophy from Ibn Sina, al-Ghazali, Surawardi, and Ibn Arabi was accepted and elaborated further by the intellectuals of the School of Isfahan. The ultimate aim of these Shia philosophers of the Safavid period was to synthesize the entire discourse in history of Islamic philosophy. In Mir Damad, this kind of intellectual ambition was obvious. Mir Damad, as a philosopher, jurist, and Sufi, wrote many treatises on logic and juridical ethics with as good a skill as he composed mystical poetry. Quote, he expounded a rigorously logical philosophy and yet wrote a treatise on a mystical vision he had received in Qum. He harmonized Ibn Sina's cosmology with Shiite imamology and made the 14 pure ones of Shiism the ontological principles of cosmic existence. The essence of the School of Isfahan was an attempt to synthesize the various scientific treasures in Islam into a harmonious ontological and epistemological unity. Shia scholars at the time wrote on various philosophical issues in a very wide range, from rational theology, Peripatetic philosophy, philosophy of illumination, Ibn Arabi's Sufism, Quran commentary, Shia dogmatics, to juridical ethics. Thus, the emergence of the School of Isfahan started from the success of established philosophical discourses several centuries earlier, such as the Peripatetic philosophy and the philosophy of illumination since the time of Ibn Sina and Suhrawardi. In the end, the peak of the School of Isfahan was in Mullah Sadra's hands. The intellectual endeavours of Mir Damad's generation should be regarded as the foundation of the preparation which Mullah Sadra finally completed. Both Ibn Sina's Peripatetic philosophy and Suhrawardi's philosophy of illumination were extended to reach Ibn Arabi's school of Sufism and were later fused with the doctrinal principles of Shiism. The School of Isfahan tried to shift the philosophical endeavors, which is fully abstract, to an operational level where mystical sensibility also operates. Therefore, the School of Isfahan can be identified with the efforts to formulate what is called wisdom or hikmah. The main point of the School of Isfahan was to formulate a theoretical combination of the doctrinal teachings of Shi'ism with a broad spectrum of philosophical speculation in theology and philosophy and spiritual practice, as well as mystical experience in Gnosis and Sufism. Despite great efforts in adapting mystical discourses in their philosophical orientation, the philosophers of the School of Isfahan were very sensitive and critical of popular forms of Sufism. Thus, the main feature of the philosophers of the School of Isfahan was their rejection of the popular Sufi practice of their time, which they identified as having negligently endangered the faith. Mir Damad, Mullah Sadra, Mullah Abdul Razak Lahiji, and Mullah Muhsin Faid all began their theoretical adaptations of Gnostic discourse with strong criticism of popular Sufism. Mir Findirisky went a step further and accused popular Sufis of disturbing the social order. Quotes, Mir Damad and the School of Isfahan were the supreme cultural pretext of a confident, prosperous and self-assertive Safavid state. With Mir Damad's generation of Shi'i philosophers, mystics, jurists and legal theorists, a new mode of intellectual confidence was created which could attend the whole gamut of Islamic intellectual history. The formation of the School of Isfahan is the institutional expression of a daring synthetical discourse to bring together three conflicting thrusts in Islamic intellectual history: the philosophical, the mystical, and the Shi'i doctrinal. Regardless of their degree of success or failure, the chief exponents of the School of Isfahan, from Mir Damad to Mullah Sadra, its most celebrated achievement, contributed towards the emphatic establishment of a level of unprecedented philosophical discourse which saw no fundamental difference between the intellectual configuration of reality and its mystical comprehension, or between these two modes of coming to terms with a significant truth, a truth that signifies, and the doctrinal mandate of the Shi'i faith. What would later be known as al-Hikmah Muta'aliyah, the transcendental philosophy, is the theoretical culmination of this synthesis, cutting deep through all dominant and fundamentally hostile intellectual discourses in Islam. Mir Damad's main role in the School of Isfahan is his reconstruction of the Peripatetic philosophy orientation with practical Sufism, which is actually very close to the illuminationists. His preference to be closer to the illuminationists or to become Zoroastrian can be seen from the main aspect of his ontology, namely his philosophical preference for priority of essence or priority of quiddity, as-salatul mahiyya, over priority of existence, as-salatul wujud. These two philosophical preferences have long been debated by the two great philosophers in the history of Islamic philosophy, namely Ibn Sina and Suhrawardi. Ibn Sina's philosophical preference was the priority of existence, while Suhrawardi's was the priority of quiddity. The priority of quiddity is anchored in the philosophical view that the appleness of the apple, which is the essence of the fruit, is real, while its existence is merely accidental, an attribute only necessary for the actualization of the apple. All existent beings share this accidental necessity of existence, but what makes them distinguished and thus constitutes their unique ontological status is their quiddity, their what-itisness, their appleness as opposed to banananess. Mir Damad establishes that it is the priority of quiddity that is really real, as he puts it. The essence of a thing, in whatever shape or format it might be, is the occurrence of the essence of that very thing in that form, not the attachment or appendage of something to it. Otherwise, simple matter would be turning into compound matter. Yet the bringing into being of a thing in itself is the bringing into being of that thing in that thing. Thus, whoever considers the existence of the essence an attribute amongst the actual attributes, or an aspect amongst the mental aspects, above and beyond the concept of the originating existence, he would not be amongst those who were talking to, and he would not be amongst those in search of truth, as indeed it has been said by our two Foucault companions in the act of philosophy. It asked Ibn Sina and al-Farabi. Although Mullah Sadra was the star of the School of Isfahan and the greatest student of Mir Damad, He had the different viewpoints from his own teacher. Sartre, though previously regarding the priority of essence as the real as his master, later realized that it was the priority of existence that is truly real, as he admits it. In the earlier days, I used to be a passionate defender of the thesis that the quantities are experimentally real while existence is but a mental construct, until my Lord gave me guidance and let me see his own demonstrations. All of a sudden, my spiritual eyes were opened, and I saw with utmost clarity that the truth was just the contrary of what philosophers in general had held. Praise be to God who, by the light of intuition, led me out of the darkness of the groundless idea and firmly established me upon the thesis which would never change in the present world and the hereafter. As a result, I now hold that the individual existences of things are primary realities, while the quantities are the permanent archetypes that have never smelt even the fragrance of existence. The individual existences are nothing but beams of light, radiated by the true light which is the absolutely self-subsistent existence. The absolute existence in each of its individualized form is characterized by a number of essential properties and intelligible qualities, and each of these properties and qualities is what is usually known as quantity. This very complex philosophical matter deserves a separate discussion another time, and we'll also discuss the crux of Mir Damad's thoughts in another episode. See you next time.